Hey guys, it's Dasher Zach back with another review, this time with the Epomaker CarbonX. It's got carbon fiber, so it must be better, right? All jokes aside, this is the second mouse from Epomaker following up their first iteration, the Click. It's a mouse I wasn't entirely sure what to expect from, and I came away surprisingly impressed. I truly did enjoy this mouse. Didn't realize at first that it came so close to the Scyrox V6 and also competed nicely with the GPX 2C. But does this mouse justify its $80 price tag, and does it deserve a spot on your desk? Let's find out. Hey guys, just a quick shout out for all the support and interaction you've been providing lately. I am truly appreciative of it. Every sub, like, and comment truly does help. It proves to brands that I'm actually worth sending units to, and it helps sustain the channel for me and make my life a whole lot easier. So I hope these words don't ring hollow. I truly do appreciate the support, and with that, back to the review. Here we have it, the Epomaker CarbonX. For what it's worth, one of my favorite mice that I've tried recently, which is not something I thought I would be saying with these large holes here on the back. And coming from Epomaker, I mean, honestly, nothing against Epomaker. They're just not who I think of first when it comes to top of the line, pristine gaming mice. They make great keyboards. I love working with them. The Epomaker Click was a solid entry into the mouse space, and this is their follow-up, but I have been largely impressed by this. It does have 8K polling, a 3950 Nordic 52 series MCU. The shell is carbon fiber. To what extent, I'm not sure. I think it's definitely more carbon fiber than a lot of the composites we've seen, like the Attack Shark R5, R11, IPI Float, etc., and it does have a very unique texture I'll talk about here in a bit due to that shell, I believe. It's also on the smaller side in length at only 118 millimeters, which is very good for me. I do enjoy smaller mice for aiming very well. Mice that have a nice hump presence, and this is sort of a center slight rear bias hump that is really good at filling my hand even at only 118 millimeters, as you see Sunday Night Football flash in the background there. But without talking much more about this mouse, let's get into the implementation. Starting off here with the main clicks, and thank goodness we have Omron opticals. It's been too long since I've reviewed an Omron optical mouse, and they feel absolutely pristine in this mouse. As you can see here, some pre-travel, some post, but nothing egregious. These are very spammable Omrons, but they're on the more like sharp tactile side of Omron implementations. They remind me somewhat of the Lamzu Maya X, which is my #1 best Omron implementation ever. This is probably top 3 along with that, maybe the Mad G, a couple other mice that have felt really good. It is one of the standout features of the mouse. It is sharper, more tactile, and heavier here at the top, a firm medium actuation there. But for a majority of the switch, I would say it's medium light and extremely spammable. You're going to be able to get a very high CPS with this. You're going to have no problem spamming them, which is a standard property of the Omron when implemented decent to well. Side play here is literally non-existent, extremely well designed in that regard. Shout out Kaisona, as this is a Kaisona MC11 shell. No problem there. Often companies that aren't super mouse focused are honestly those that are. Corsair, for example, taking the Dario A950 Air, making it their Saber Pro V2. Anyway, these companies often grab a shell, make their own small refinements, change some internals, release a mouse, and I see nothing wrong with that as long as the final product is well priced and well implemented, and I find that to be the case here. So, moving on to the scroll wheel. A very satisfying ridged rubber here on the scroll wheel. The steps are defined, they're on the lighter side. The click here is very spammable, about a medium actuation, but good in use and no complaints from me here on the scroll wheel. Coming to the side buttons here, they do protrude nicely from the shell. They do not have the same texture as the rest of the shell. They're more of like a bare plastic. There's a bit of pre and a bit of post-travel. They don't sink too far into the shell there, and there's not too much pre-travel where it's not responsive. They're not the most spammable, but they're definitely serviceable side buttons, and there's actually a notable lack of side-to-side play there, which is great to see. So overall, they're pretty decently well implemented. They're not a standout feature of the mouse, but they also don't hold the mouse back, in my opinion. Coming to the bottom of the mouse here, you can see we have a mostly open shell design and smaller split skates, sort of like an older Lamzu design almost. These skates here are, as you can see pretty clearly here, very nicely rounded, but they are notably not the thickest skates. They were a little bit scratchy here on a glass pad, for example. Performance wise, they're not muddy. I didn't really mind them. They're on the average to maybe slightly faster than average stock skate side, so they didn't really hold me back in game, and they're totally fine. I would say you may want to replace these just due to the thickness depending on the softness of your pad, or if you're playing on glass for a smoother experience. So probably the weakest feature of the mouse. And then also the sensor position here is just a bit forward of center, but nothing too crazy far forward. The coating on this mouse is ungodly satisfying in hand, I guess is what I would say. It's very, very smooth, but also with any amount of like warmth in your hand, it gets very grippy. I think I say that a lot, but I really mean it here. For me, this is a top tier coating. Like, it's not similar to like a Viper V3 Pro White, the one I always reference as like the golden standard. It doesn't feel as like sticky rubberized as like a really good M-Chose coating, for example, but it's really grippy and very satisfying in like a different way. You can almost see how buttery smooth it feels. And for me, I'm able to lock in nicely with this grip on this mouse. It's probably like an 8 out of 10 overall as far as grippiness goes, but as far as me wanting to use the mouse due to the coating, coating, it is an absolute 10 out of 10, and I am a huge fan of this coating. I could, however, see it being on the slicker side if you do have sort of like serially cold hands, so I would look out for that. And then as far as build integrity goes, it might be down to the material, but there is absolutely zero flex anywhere on this mouse. Even these like very thin pieces here between these giant holes, no flex. There's a very bit here on the bottom because the bottom is just 100% like plastic. You can see the difference in materials there, split from the bottom to the actual rest of the shell. But overall, for a mouse that has this many holes, and again, I think it's down to the material used, shockingly crazy good build integrity, along again with the fact that there's no play here on the switches. I think the material is a standout feature of this mouse, whatever element percent of carbon fiber there is here. So when it comes to the overall implementation of this mouse, pretty darn good. I really enjoy it. I'm going to do a slight foray into weight balancing here because you may have guessed, looking at how hollow the back is and how filled up the front is, this is a very front heavy mouse here. You can grip even this far up on the mouse and it's just sort of balanced in my hand. So it is like a point that's in front of the sensor. Oddly enough, in game, I just am not overly sensitive to weight balancing issues, so it did not bother me. But do be aware, if you're someone who needs a very perfectly well balanced mouse, this is not quite that, just due to where the internals fall and the battery being farther forward. I mean, the battery is only 300 milliamp hours, so if you moved it back here, it would probably help. I'm not sure if it would make it perfectly balanced, and that's probably something you could easily do with a little bit of adhesive if you really wanted to stick to this mouse and make it a little bit more balanced. The other aspect of the mouse that needs to be talked about in implementation is just sort of how it came though, and that is the large holes here in the shells. As far as these ones here at the top, they don't contact my hand with how I grip the mouse, so I have no comments on those. But obviously, if you're an aggressive clawer, you might actually click into those, and that would be honestly super annoying, so I'd watch out for that as well. But as far as these back holes, I was really worried they would bother me, but I think with how the structure is in my tilted grip, there is a bit of the meat of my hand that sinks into this smaller hole here, and beside that, it doesn't really bother me. It could be very user dependent whether or not part of your hand, if you're anchored to the back, falls into one of these really large holes here. These are quite large. I honestly just looked across my desk to compare it to other mice with holes, and I don't have any on my desk because solid shells are kind of the way that companies are going. So as far as improvements here, this does come in at 46 grams, advertised at 50. I'll show you the actual weight later. Nice to see them over advertised, I guess, to sort of compensate, but I do think maybe a lighter weight with these holes would have been desirable. Like again, the mouse is not too heavy by any means. I think people who say, oh, it's 50 grams, 46 grams, and it's an empty shell, like you can complain all you want, but it's still like a very well implemented mouse. But solid shell 50 grams, maybe, if that could be a thing. I'm not sure how much weight this shaved, maybe a significant amount. This is maybe even a solid top, leave the bottom open. That's totally fine. Less people are going to complain about that. Would be the way to go. Even if it maybe added 3 to 4 grams, I think people would be okay with that because this is probably the most divisive part of the mouse. Again, you'd think with how much back palm contact here I have, it would really bother me, but it really did not. I will say I do always put grip tape here on the one part of my hand that contacts the mouse the most, so it sort of protected against that uncomfortable feeling, and overall made the mouse very satisfying to use. Again, even with a few like sort of drawbacks, imperfections with this mouse, it's one of the mice that I've tested recently that I want to keep using, that's going to stay on my desk, just because honestly, the Omron optical implementation is that darn good. It is very crisp, very tactile, and the coating is just not quite like I felt before. Super satisfying, and I always am just really happy the second I put my hand on this mouse. Rolling onward to the shape comparisons, the shape that I found this to be the most similar to, you may not have known, is actually the Scyrox V6. It shares a shocking amount of similarity to this in a lot of ways, and let's check that out. Starting from the bottom silhouette here, you can see these are shockingly similar in back flare, taper, and there's a slight difference there on the front. The mice are almost the exact same length if you stack them up to each other, and the sensor is a bit further forward here on the CarbonX. Maybe a bit more apparent from this angle, but the CarbonX is just a bit wider at all points. The back flares out a little bit more, but the top to down taper here is a little less severe. It's very much more pronounced here on the Scyrox, and then the Scyrox V6 flares back out a bit here, as you can see, and there is a bit of that on the CarbonX, but it's more flat as you approach the front part of the mouse. So the combination of that further forward flare and the slightly stronger tapering does really reinforce like the narrower contact points for both my pinky and my thumb here in line with the sensor on the V6, and it just feels a little bit safer. Interestingly enough, I line up pretty similarly here on the CarbonX, but it does feel just a little bit safer, and the less taper here on the sides, a little bit less narrow here, and a little bit less flare out here on the front. Like think Maya, again, Scyrox HTS shape. So this is just like a slightly safer version of the shape. And then from the side, you can also see there are a few differences as well. We're not as long here in the back. We taper off a little bit more quickly, but you can see how similar the humps of these mice profile. We do taper a bit further down here in the front as well to go along with that flare, with slightly higher click height here on the CarbonX. But overall, we profile very similarly. One more slight difference to call out that I haven't mentioned yet. The hump height on this mouse is probably 1 millimeter lower, but I still felt plenty supported in the top middle part of the mouse. But but noticeably not quite as much contact to this part of my hand due to the slightly higher hump height of the V6. Another mouse that I need to compare it to because it's the same length is the GPX 2C. Some people have called this a mini GPX, the HTS shape. It's really not due to that strong tapering and flare here. It's just not flat at all. I understand that the taller mid hump is why that's said, and you can see some similarities here on the side view with that taller mid hump on the 2C. We're actually much closer in overall hump height between the CarbonX and the 2C. As you can see here, obviously you know the GPX shape. I haven't fully reviewed this mouse yet, but you've probably watched some reviews, and it's obviously very, very flat. Minimal tapering here, not a crazy amount of flare here, although it is a bit more apparent and defined on the mini version of the shape. But obviously this is a narrower mouse. You can see the greater back flare here, the greater tapering in, and it's also wider on the front. So what I would say is the CarbonX and even the HTS is sort of like a GPX mini with some more character, similar hump profile, more flare and taper, and it just feels a little bit longer in hand. Like if I grip this 2C, I don't know if it's due to the narrowness and how it pushes my hand forward, but like my fingers hang off this front pretty darn far in the 2C with my crazy grip, and not quite as far here on the CarbonX. As far as which of these shapes I prefer, I am a huge HTS Scyrox V6 shape fan, so I do prefer the CarbonX's shape. Coating, clicks. I'll give the skate edge here to the GPX 2C, which is not something you usually hear people say because they are larger, and they did add some rounding here, which I'll mention in my full review. Scroll wheel also better on the CarbonX. And as you see, this $80 mouse from a keyboard focused company is outstripping the $160 offering from Logitech. The main thing the 2C has going for it is its shape, and that's about where it ends for me. But I thought it worthy of mentioning here due to the similar overall length, 118 millimeters, and the fact that these are very center hump claw mice. Just thought I'd mention every time I bring this back out for review, because I never really touch it or main it, I should use this mouse. It feels darn good. As far as my overall thoughts on this mouse, I need to talk about both value and performance, and I also need to turn off the damn mouse so it's not messing around with my recording. This comes in at $80. That's more than a Scyrox V6. Can I recommend this over a Scyrox V6? No, not wholeheartedly due to the weight and the solid shell on the Scyrox V6. That's just something Scyrox competes in hardcore, like the Scyrox V8, for example, comes in. It is basically an X2H Crazy Light a year ahead of this time. It's just really, they do really impressive stuff over there. Do I currently want this in my hand more than the Scyrox V6? Yes, in ways I've already tried to explain to you. I can't really elaborate any more than that. If you want this mouse and you want to spend $80 on it, which is the price tag, do I fault you for that? No. Do I think it's a solid price? Yeah. Do I wish it was $60? Do I think it'd be a pretty compelling option at $60? I do, but I really don't mind the fact that it's $80. I think it's a pretty fair price for the improvements they made with the internals, coating, and clicks on this versus just like the base shell that came along. Do you know this is an Ajaz collab? I'm not sure where Ajaz comes in. Maybe they were the factory aspect of this mouse after Epomaker picked out what they wanted to put into it. But again, Epomaker X Ajaz, CarbonX for what it's worth. Performance-wise, this is not top tier, but it's not bad anyway. It's like firmly into the category that a lot of mice fall in, where I don't notice any issues with it in-game, but if you look deep into mouse tester, you'll see some off-schedule pulls. You'll see that like at 2000 hertz, for example, there's a fair amount of pulls at 0.75 milliseconds, 1 millisecond, instead of a very tight, sort of cohesive amount of pulls at the 0.5 milliseconds you'd expect. That maths out for 2K hertz, for example. And that was sort of the story at 1, 2, 4, and 8K hertz. I didn't have any egregious issues. In-game, it felt fine. I have no problem recommending this as a mouse that will work fine for everybody who picks it up. But again, if you're looking for like top peak OP1 8K performance, you're not going to find that here, nor do you expect to. So overall, my impressions of this mouse are, I really enjoy it. It's an interesting cell position versus the Scyrox V6, but again, there are also differences in shape. Could and do definitely set this apart from the Scyrox V6. So as long as you don't mind the slightly forward biased weight balancing or want to like adjust the battery position to fix that, and you can deal with the back holes in the shell here, this is a pretty darn good mouse. I wasn't sure what to expect coming into this, and I was very, very impressed with it. I do really enjoy it. I've used it in work, used it in game, have not wanted to stop using it when I was testing other mice. I did sort of want to come back to it. I don't mind the 46 gram weight at all with the holes in the shell. Could it be lighter? Sure. Do I want it to be lighter? Doesn't really bother me, not that much. So overall, just a very solid offering from Epomaker. Very good move in the right direction. Interesting to see if they go with carbon fiber shell again on their next mouse, or when they even go with another mouse. And interested to see when they make that move if they go with a solid shell. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. The software here is nothing new, but I am glad to see it wrapped into a WebDriver. Can set the bounce. These are optical switches, 20 milliseconds in the software. Obviously, you have settings for DPI, polling rate up to 8K here. I ran this in highest performance mode the entire time with motion sync, ripple control, and angle snap turned off. And then you have settings here just like you used to have on the old Lamsey mice. Again, nothing new here for long distance mode, which I also used. And that's about all there is for the software. And no, I could not get this to connect to the desktop version of the Epomaker driver, so it does appear to be WebDriver owned. For weight, completely stock, we get the CarbonX CarbonX coming in at 46 grams on the dot, actually 4 grams below advertised, and definitely in the acceptable weight range. We do get also the Scyrox V6, holy color balancing, with Magic Ice Skates coming in at 43 grams, so only 2.8 grams lighter here. Not a massive difference in the weight, but let's check out some measurement differences between the two. Getting the max back flare on the CarbonX at 62.6 millimeters, whereas the back flare on the V6 is only 61.1 millimeters, 1.5 millimeter difference. The narrowest taper point on the V6 is about 54.1 millimeters, where I'm getting 55.7 millimeters on the CarbonX. Do note, I'm measuring above this bottom plastic on the carbon fiber. I get the front flare on the V6 at 61.2 millimeters, measuring higher up here on the mouse. And as you can see on the CarbonX, we don't flare back out, so only 59.9 millimeters here in the front. CarbonX max hump height there in the middle is 39.4 millimeters, whereas the V6 is indeed taller, not quite the 1 millimeter I estimated, but 40 millimeters for the middle hump height. So just to reiterate, distinctive shape differences here, more back flare on the CarbonX, less taper, but also less flare out here on the top part of the mouse where you would grip, and a slightly lower hump height. So that about sums it up for my thoughts on the Epomaker CarbonX. It was definitely a pleasant surprise, a mouse that I thoroughly enjoyed testing, and a mouse that I do intend to continue using just due to its super satisfying clicks and coding. It's a very encouraging step forward for Epomaker, and it does excite me to see what they have coming next in their mouse pipeline. And for what it's worth, I've been making their HE80 keyboard recently, and I've been enjoying that quite a bit as well. Please subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video. You can follow me on X at DasterZack, check out the Mousecast podcast, join up on my Discord, and with that, we'll see you.